The worst decisions are never made in calm moments. They are made in the exact second your heart stops believing in consequences. I did not know that then. My name is Madison Reed, and until that night, I believed I had control over my life, my relationship, and the future I had carefully built in Chicago. I was wrong on all three. It started with silence. The kind of silence that feels heavier than words. I remember standing outside the apartment I shared with Tyler Brooks, my boyfriend of 3 years, staring at my phone and wondering why he had not answered my calls. It was supposed to be a normal evening. I had left work early, carrying news I thought would change everything between us. I had been promoted. It was small, but it was mine. I even imagined celebrating with him, maybe dinner at the small Italian place 2 blocks from our building, maybe just a quiet night where everything finally felt stable. Instead, I found a message on his tablet when I went inside to leave it on the table. I did not mean to look. I was just placing it down when the screen lit up. A notification preview. A name I did not recognize. A message that was not meant for me. It was short, casual, and devastating in its simplicity. I stood there for a long time without moving. The apartment felt different after that. The air felt thinner. The space I thought I belonged in suddenly felt unfamiliar, like I was visiting someone else's life. When Tyler came home later that night, I did not ask questions at first. I wanted him to explain without being forced. But he did not explain. He avoided my eyes. He spoke in half sentences. And in those broken fragments, the truth became impossible to ignore. I remember the sound of my own voice when I finally asked him directly. It did not sound like mine. It sounded distant. Like it belonged to someone who had already started leaving. He did not deny it. That was the moment something inside me stopped trying. Not in anger. Not in drama. Just silence. A clean break in my ability to pretend. I left the apartment that night without packing anything meaningful. Just my coat, my phone, and the feeling that if I stayed one more minute I would lose. Whatever part of myself was still intact. Outside, Chicago was alive in its usual way. Cars moved through the streets. Lights reflected off wet pavement. People laughed inside restaurants I walked past without seeing. I kept walking until I could not feel my thoughts anymore. I told myself I just needed air. Distance. A place where my mind could slow down. But the city does not slow down for anyone. Hours passed without meaning. I do not remember choosing the hotel, only standing in its lobby later, holding my card, hearing my name spoken by someone at the desk. Everything felt disconnected, like I was watching myself from a few steps behind. I should have gone to sleep. I should have called a friend. I should have done anything that made sense. Instead, I stayed in a room that did not feel like mine, staring at the ceiling while my life rearranged itself in ways I did not yet understand. And somewhere between heartbreak and exhaustion, I made a decision I would not be able to undo. I did not know his name. I did not know his story. I only knew that when he looked at me across the dim hotel bar later that night, it felt like the world had finally stopped pretending to be simple. I did not remember walking out of the hotel bar at first. What I remember instead is the feeling of being pulled forward by something I could not name, like my body had decided to move before my mind agreed. The stranger was still there in my thoughts, sitting across from me as if he had always belonged in the quiet spaces of my life that I had never paid attention to. I told myself it was nothing more than impulse, the kind of reckless decision people make when they are trying to forget pain by replacing it with something louder. That was what I believed I was doing. Forgetting Tyler. Forgetting the message. Forgetting the version of my life that had just broken apart in my hands. I did not expect him to still be there when I returned to the bar after stepping outside for air. But he was. He was not watching anyone else. Not looking around. Not distracted by noise or movement. It was as if he had been waiting for something specific, and I had unknowingly become that thing. I sat down again without thinking. That was my first mistake. Or maybe my only one. He did not introduce himself. Not properly. He only looked at me for a moment, long enough that I felt strangely seen in a way that made me uncomfortable and calm at the same time. "You should not be here alone," he said. I almost laughed at that. It sounded absurd coming from a stranger in a hotel bar at midnight in Chicago. I told him I was fine. That I just needed a drink. That I was not looking for conversation. He did not argue. He only nodded slightly, as if accepting information rather than reacting to it. That should have been the end of it. But silence has a way of stretching when neither person chooses to break it. I remember the bartender placing a glass in front of me without asking questions. I remember the faint music in the background that no longer felt important. And I remember the way he watched the glass but never touched his own. When I finally asked him why he was there, he did not answer immediately. Instead, he asked me a question that made me pause. Are you running from something or toward something? I did not know how to answer honestly, so I said neither. That was a lie. He seemed to understand that without needing clarification. People usually lie in that order, he said quietly. I looked at him more closely then. There was nothing obvious about him that suggested danger or familiarity. He was dressed simply, but there was something controlled about the way he held himself, like someone used to environments where nothing could be unpredictable. I asked his name. He hesitated just long enough for me to notice. Adrian, he said finally. Just Adrian. It felt incomplete, but I did not press further. Instead, I told myself again that this meant nothing. Just a conversation with a stranger during a bad night. Yet when I stood up to leave, I noticed he did not move until I did. Not in a way that felt intrusive. More like awareness. Like he had already calculated the moment I would decide to go. I stepped toward the exit, expecting that would be the end of it. But just before I reached the doors, I heard his voice behind me again. Madison, he said. I froze. I had never told him my name. Some people leave your life without saying goodbye. Others leave questions behind that never stop following you. I stood frozen beside the hotel doors, my hand still resting on the handle, my heart suddenly beating fast enough that I could hear it. Madison, he had said. Not miss. Not excuse me. My name. I turned slowly. Adrian remained seated exactly where I had left him. Calm. Unmoved. As if speaking my name had been the most natural thing in the world. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The hotel bar seemed quieter than before. The music faded into the background. The conversations around us blurred into meaningless noise. How do you know my name? I finally asked. He looked toward the glass in front of him before meeting my eyes again. It was on your reservation card when you checked in, he said. The explanation made sense immediately. Simple. Logical. Completely reasonable. Yet something about it still felt incomplete. Maybe it was the pause before he answered. Maybe it was the fact that he had noticed at all. Most people would not have paid attention. I should have left right then. Instead, I walked back to the table. The chair felt familiar now, which was strange considering I had only been sitting there for a short time. You notice everything, I said quietly. A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Occupational habit. What occupation? I asked. The smile disappeared almost instantly. Business, he replied. That was all. No company name. No title. No details. Just one carefully chosen word. Normally, that kind of answer would have annoyed me. But there was something about Adrian that made direct questions feel pointless. He answered only what he wanted to answer. The rest remained hidden behind a wall I could not see through. We talked for another hour. Or maybe 2. Time felt different around him. I told him small things about myself. Not the important parts. Not the heartbreak. Not Tyler. Just harmless details about work, coffee, favorite neighborhoods, and childhood memories. Somehow, he listened in a way that made ordinary stories feel important. He never interrupted. Never. Checked his phone. Never looked around the room. His attention remained fixed on me, and after months of feeling invisible inside my own relationship, that attention felt dangerous. Not because it threatened me, because I liked it. Eventually the crowd thinned. The bartender began cleaning empty tables. Midnight became 1 o'clock, then later still. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. The city lights reflected across wet streets like scattered gold. I remember standing near the lobby entrance afterward, neither of us seeming eager to leave. There was no dramatic moment. No grand confession. Just 2 strangers sharing a silence that somehow felt easier than speaking. Adrian glanced toward the rain outside. You should get some rest, he said. There was concern in his voice, subtle but genuine. For a strange moment, I wanted to ask him not to disappear. I wanted to ask for a phone number. A last name. Something that would make this encounter real tomorrow morning. But pride stopped me. Maybe fear did too. So I simply nodded. Good night, Adrian. His eyes held mine for a second longer than necessary. Good night, Madison. I went upstairs carrying a feeling I could not explain. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the hotel curtains. For a brief moment, I almost convinced myself the night before had been a dream. Then I looked around the room and realized something else. Adrian was gone. No message. No number. No way to find him. Only a memory that already felt impossible to forget. I told myself that forgetting him would be easy. That is what I believed when I woke up alone in the hotel room the next morning. The sunlight felt too normal for what I had experienced the night before. It filled the space with a kind of false comfort, as if nothing unusual had happened. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at the empty chair where I had been sitting with Adrian hours earlier. The silence in the room felt heavier than before. Not peaceful. Not calming. Just empty in a way that made me uncomfortable. I checked my phone expecting nothing. There were no messages. No missed calls. No sign that the night had ever extended beyond my memory. Part of me felt relieved. The other part felt strangely disappointed, though I refused to admit it. I told myself it was just a random encounter. A conversation with a stranger during a vulnerable moment. Nothing more. I went back to my apartment that afternoon. Chicago had already returned to its normal rhythm. Traffic. Voices. Movement. Life continued as if my world had not shifted in any way at all. Tyler had left several messages, but I did not open them. I could not yet decide what I felt about him. Anger still existed, but it was no longer sharp. It was something duller now. Something that no longer demanded immediate action. The days that followed blurred together. Work, sleep, silence. I avoided thinking about the hotel. I avoided thinking about Adrian. I even avoided the memory of my own decisions that night, as if ignoring them might slowly erase them. But memory does not work that way. It stays. It waits. And then it returns when you are least prepared. It happened exactly 2 weeks later. I was in a corporate meeting downtown, sitting at a long glass table surrounded by people from different departments. The discussion was about a potential partnership with a major investment group. I was not leading the meeting. I was simply there to observe and take notes. That was supposed to be all. Then the doors opened. I did not look up immediately. I remember hearing the shift in energy before I saw anything. Conversations slowed. Postures changed. Attention redirected without explanation. When I finally raised my eyes, I saw him. Adrian Hayes. He walked into the room as if it belonged to him. Not in an arrogant way. In a factual way. Like ownership was not something he needed to announce. It was already understood. I felt my breath stop for a moment, but I forced myself to remain still. This was not possible. Not here. Not like this. Our eyes met briefly across the room. His expression did not change. No surprise. No acknowledgement of the past. Only recognition, quiet and controlled, as if he had expected this outcome long before I did. I looked away first. The meeting continued, but I stopped hearing most of it. Words became background noise. The only thing I could focus on was the fact that the stranger from that night was now sitting at the head of the table, speaking with authority, directing decisions that affected millions of dollars in multiple companies. At one point, he mentioned projections and growth strategies. His voice was steady, precise, completely different from the quiet tone I remembered in the hotel bar. I tried to convince myself I had misjudged him, that I had imagined more meaning in that night than actually existed. But then, near the end of the meeting, he looked directly at me again. Just for a second longer than necessary. And I knew. This was not coincidence. This was continuation. And I had just walked straight into the next chapter without realizing I was already part of it. The meeting ended, but the tension did not. It followed me out of the conference room, down the elevator, through the lobby, and all the way back to my desk. I tried focusing on work. Emails. Reports. Deadlines. Anything that would force my mind back into familiar territory. None of it worked. Every time I looked at my computer screen, I saw Adrian sitting at the head of that table. Every time my phone vibrated, I expected a message that never came. The strange part was not seeing him again. The strange part was realizing how quickly he had disrupted the careful balance I had rebuilt after Tyler. For weeks, I had been surviving one day at a time. Then Adrian appeared, and suddenly survival no longer felt like enough. Around 4 in the afternoon, my manager stopped by my desk. "Madison, can you bring these documents to the executive floor? They need them before tomorrow morning." Normally, I would have handed the task to someone else. That day, I volunteered before I could stop myself. The executive floor occupied the top levels of the building. Everything looked different there. Quieter. More polished. Even the lighting seemed designed to make people feel important. I walked through the corridor carrying the folder and reminding myself that delivering paperwork did not mean I would see him. Yet the moment I reached the reception area, I knew he was nearby. There was no logical reason for that feeling. I simply knew. The receptionist accepted the documents and thanked me. I turned to leave. Then I heard my name. Madison. My entire body froze. Adrian stood several feet away near a glass office overlooking the city skyline. He was not wearing a suit jacket anymore. Just a white shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. Somehow that made him look even more intimidating. More human too. We looked at each other for a moment that felt longer than it should have. "I thought you disappeared," I said before I could stop myself. A faint smile touched his expression. "You disappeared first." The answer caught me off guard. It was not defensive. It was honest. For some reason that made it harder to respond. He glanced toward the windows. Chicago stretched beneath us in gold and silver reflections as the sun began to set. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. "Almost 3 years." He nodded slightly. "Longer than most people stay." There was something unusual about the conversation. Adrian spoke as if every question mattered. Most executives rush through interactions. He never seemed rushed at all. Before I realized it, nearly 20 minutes had passed. We talked about work, about the city, about nothing important. Yet every second carried a strange sense of significance. Then his phone rang. The shift was immediate. His expression sharpened. The relaxed atmosphere disappeared. Business returned. "I should get back downstairs," I said. Adrian looked at me for a moment before nodding. "Probably." I started toward the elevator. Just before the doors opened, his voice stopped me again. "Madison." I turned. "Thank you for coming upstairs." It was such a simple sentence. Yet no one had thanked me for something so small in a very long time. The elevator doors closed between us seconds later. As I descended toward my floor, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. For the first time since discovering Tyler's betrayal, I was smiling without forcing it. And that realization frightened me more than anything else. After that day on the executive floor, I started noticing things I could no longer ignore. First, I told myself it was coincidence. The kind of coincidence your mind creates when it is trying to connect patterns that do not exist. But the pattern kept repeating. Small things at first. A reserved meeting room suddenly scheduled at the same time I had a deadline. A project proposal that aligned too closely with ideas I had only mentioned in passing during internal discussions. A name that kept appearing in approvals just one step above mine. Adrian Hayes. I did not see him again immediately, but I felt his presence inside the structure of my workdays. It was unsettling in a way I could not explain. Not because it was obvious, because it was subtle, almost invisible. One evening, I stayed late at the office to finish a report. The building had already grown quiet. Most apartments were empty. Only the soft hum of machines and distant cleaning staff broke the silence. I was about to leave when I noticed an envelope on my desk. No sender. No explanation. Inside was a printed copy of a market analysis I had prepared the day before. My version. But edited. Improved. Annotated in precise handwriting along the margins. I recognized the level of detail immediately. It was not from my team. It was too advanced. Too accurate. At the bottom of the last page, there was a single line written in clean ink. "You think too carefully for someone who is not being watched." My breath stopped. I looked around the empty office instinctively, even though I knew no one was there. For a moment, I considered leaving everything behind and walking out without looking back. Instead, I stayed seated, staring at the page until my thoughts stopped making sense. The next morning, I tried to dismiss it. I told myself someone was playing a strange corporate prank. But deep down, I knew it was not random. That afternoon, I was called into another executive briefing. This time I was not just delivering documents. I was asked to present part of my analysis. The room was larger than before, more formal, more controlled. And at the far end of the table, Adrian was already seated when I walked in. He did not acknowledge me immediately. He let the meeting begin naturally. Let me speak. Let others respond. Only when I finished did he finally look up. Your projection model is incomplete, he said calmly. The room went silent. I felt every eye shift toward me. I prepared to defend my work, but he raised a hand slightly, not to interrupt me, but to signal continuation. You are missing external variables, he continued. Long-term behavioral shifts in consumer response under unstable market conditions. Then he turned the page of my report. The exact page I had seen the night before with handwritten notes. My heart tightened. I did not remember giving him access. I did not remember anyone giving him access. Yet there it was. My work, analyzed in real time by the same man who had appeared in my life out of nowhere weeks ago. After the meeting ended, I stayed behind as others left. I needed answers. The room slowly emptied until only Adrian remained. He did not wait for me to speak first. You found the notes, he said. It was not a question. I finally asked the only thing that mattered. Why are you doing this? He looked at me for a long moment before responding. Because you are already part of something you have not realized yet. I felt my chest tighten. That is not an answer, I said quietly. He stepped slightly away from the table, looking out toward the glass walls of the city. You met me at a point in your life where everything was breaking, he said. People rarely notice what happens right before they change. His words should have sounded vague. But they did not. They sounded intentional. Like he had been waiting for me to reach this point all along. And for the first time since that night in the hotel, I began to understand something I had been avoiding. Adrian Hayes had not entered my life by accident. And whatever connection existed between us, it was not finished. It was only beginning to reveal itself. The strange thing about being respected is that once you experience it, you can never again pretend that less is enough. For days after that conversation, Adrian's words stayed with me. They followed me through meetings, through morning coffee, through quiet train rides home. People rarely notice what happens right before they change. I hated how much I thought about that sentence. Mostly because part of me knew he was right. The version of myself who had accepted disappointment from Tyler no longer existed. Somewhere between heartbreak and unexpected honesty, I had started becoming someone else. The change became impossible to ignore a week later. Our company hosted a major networking event downtown. Hundreds of guests filled the ballroom. Investors, executives, clients, and media representatives moved through the room beneath enormous crystal chandeliers. Everything shimmered with money and confidence. I stood near one of the presentation displays, discussing marketing strategy with a potential partner, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Madison. My stomach tightened immediately. Tyler. I turned slowly. He looked almost exactly the same as the last time I had seen him. Same smile. Same expensive watch. Same confidence that had once convinced me he cared more than he actually did. For a moment, old memories tried to return. Then I remembered the messages. The lies. The silence. The memories disappeared as quickly as they came. Madison, I have been trying to reach you for weeks, he said. I know, I replied calmly. His expression shifted slightly. He had expected anger. Maybe tears. Maybe an argument. Calmness confused him. Can we talk? He asked. I glanced around the ballroom. There was nothing left to discuss. Tyler stepped closer. I made a mistake. I know that now. You were the best thing in my life. Once upon a time, those words would have destroyed me. That night, they felt strangely distant. Like hearing a song I used to love but no longer recognized. Before I could respond, movement near the entrance drew attention across the room. Conversations softened. Heads turned. The atmosphere changed in the same way it had during that first boardroom meeting. Adrian Hayes had arrived. He was dressed in a dark tailored suit, moving through the crowd with effortless composure. He did not demand attention. He simply attracted it. Tyler noticed immediately. His eyes narrowed slightly. You know him? He asked. I hesitated. The truth was complicated. Before I could answer, Adrian's gaze found mine from across the ballroom. The distance between us felt insignificant for a brief second. Then, he walked toward us. Every step increased Tyler's discomfort. "Good evening, Madison," Adrian said. His voice remained calm, professional, controlled. Yet somehow it carried a warmth he reserved for no one else. "Good evening, Adrian," I replied. Tyler looked between us. Recognition slowly appeared in his expression. He understood the difference immediately. Adrian was not speaking to me out of obligation. He was paying attention. Genuine attention. The kind Tyler had never learned how to give. We exchanged a few simple words about work and the event. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing personal. Yet I noticed something important. Adrian never interrupted me. Never spoke over me. Never answered for me. He treated my opinions as though they mattered. The realization hit harder than any grand romantic gesture ever could. Tyler saw it too. I watched the understanding settle across his face. Not jealousy. Regret. The kind that arrives too late to change anything. As Adrian and I continued talking, I realized I was no longer standing in the shadow of my past. For the first time in a very long time, I was standing in front of my future. After that night at the ballroom, nothing felt stable anymore. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, persistent way that followed me through every ordinary moment. I tried telling myself that nothing had truly changed. I still had my job, my apartment, my routine. But the truth was, I no longer moved through my life the same way. I noticed things I had never noticed before. The way people shifted their attention when certain names were mentioned. The way conversations paused when Adrian Hayes entered a room. The way power existed not as something loud, but something silent and absolute. Tyler's presence faded quickly after that evening. He tried calling once, then again a few days later. I did not answer. There was nothing left to say that would not feel like reopening a door I had already closed. But what unsettled me most was not Tyler. It was Adrian. Because after the ballroom, he did not disappear back into distance like before. Instead, he remained present in ways that were harder to ignore. Not physically intrusive. Not obvious. Just consistent. A meeting adjusted here. A recommendation forwarded there. A project assignment that aligned too perfectly with my strengths to feel random. I began to understand something I had not been willing to accept before. Adrian was not observing me from a distance. He was already inside the structure of my life. One evening, I stayed late again at the office. The city outside the glass walls had turned dark, lights stretching across the skyline like scattered reflections of another world. I was reviewing campaign data when I heard the soft sound of the door opening behind me. I did not need to turn around to know who it was. "You are still working late," Adrian said. His voice was calm as always. I closed the file on my screen. "It is becoming a habit." "That is not always a good thing," he replied. I finally turned in my chair. He stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, looking at the city instead of me at first. There was something different about him in this setting. Less distant. More present. "Why do you keep appearing like this?" I asked. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer to the window. "I am not appearing, Madison. I am here because I need to be." That answer should have frustrated me. It did not. Instead, it made something inside me shift again. I stood up slowly. "That is not an explanation. It is the truth I am willing to give you right now," he said. Silence settled between us. Outside, the city continued moving without awareness of anything we were saying. I realized then that my life had already divided into two versions. The one where I still believed everything was random, and the one where nothing had ever been random at all. Adrian finally turned toward me. "There is something I have not told you," he said quietly. My heartbeat slowed without my permission. "What is it?" He hesitated just long enough for me to feel the weight of what was coming. "The night we met," he said, "was not the first time I had seen you." The room felt colder even though the temperature had not changed. I stared at him, waiting for clarification that did not come immediately. "What are you saying?" I asked. Adrian's expression remained controlled, but something deeper passed through it for the first time. "I have been aware of you longer than you think, Madison. Before that night. Before Tyler. Before everything." My breath caught. "That is not possible." He took a step closer, not invading space but closing distance carefully. It is possible when you know where to look. I felt my entire understanding of reality shift in that moment. Not collapse. Shift. Because for the first time, I began to understand that the stranger from that night was never just a stranger. He was already part of a story I had been living long before I realized it had started. Sometimes the most important choice in your life has nothing to do with who loves you. It has everything to do with who allows you to become yourself. After Adrian's confession, I barely slept. His words replayed endlessly in my mind. Before that night. Before Tyler. Before everything. I tried to understand what he meant, but every explanation led to another question. Days passed. Then a week. Adrian did not pressure me. He did not call constantly. He did not appear unexpectedly. Instead, he gave me something no one else ever had. Space. Real space. The freedom to think without being influenced. The freedom to choose without being manipulated. And that silence taught me more about him than any conversation could have. One Saturday morning, I sat alone in a small coffee shop overlooking the river. Autumn had begun settling over the city. Leaves drifted across sidewalks in shades of gold and copper. People moved past the windows carrying shopping bags and cups of coffee. Ordinary lives. Ordinary choices. For the first time in months, I thought about Tyler without anger. I thought about the woman I had been while I was with him. A woman constantly proving her worth. Constantly waiting for reassurance. Constantly accepting less than she deserved because she was afraid of losing what she already had. Then I thought about Adrian. He had never asked me to become someone else. Never asked me to shrink. Never made me compete for attention. Somewhere along the way, he had simply shown me a different standard. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. Tyler. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Then I answered. His voice sounded different. Less confident. More honest. Madison, I owe you an apology. I listened quietly. He spoke for several minutes. About mistakes. About regret. About realizing too late what he had lost. When he finally finished, the silence felt surprisingly peaceful. Thank you, I said. That was all. No anger. No reconciliation. No dramatic ending. Just acceptance. Some chapters do not need to be reopened to be understood. When the call ended, I felt lighter than I had in years. That evening, Adrian invited me to dinner. Nothing extravagant. Just a quiet restaurant overlooking the city skyline. The kind of place where conversation mattered more than appearances. We sat near the window as the lights of Chicago illuminated the darkness outside. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence between us no longer felt uncertain. It felt comfortable. Finally, Adrian looked at me. There was no executive authority in his expression. No calculated confidence. Just honesty. I never expected anything from you, Madison, he said quietly. I know, I replied. He nodded. I only wanted you to have the chance to choose freely. The simplicity of that statement hit me harder than any grand declaration ever could. 'Cause I realized it was true. Tyler had wanted forgiveness. Other people wanted approval. Adrian wanted a choice. Mine. I looked out at the city one final time before turning back toward him. The skyline reflected across the glass like thousands of possibilities stretching into the distance. My future no longer felt frightening. It felt open. I smiled. Not because he was wealthy. Not because he was powerful. Not because fate had brought us together in a strange and unexpected way. I smiled because when I was with him, I never had to wonder whether I mattered. And in the end, that was the answer I had been searching for all along. The night I lost the life I thought I wanted felt like a disaster. Looking back now, I understand it was something else entirely. It was the beginning of the life I was meant to choose.